The government says additional hikes in utility bills are inevitable given the significant operating losses incurred by the Korea Electric Power Corporation and the Korea Gas Corporation. So how high are the losses by these two entities? What are the broader implications of higher utility bills? And how is the Korean economy weathering the current global slowdown? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we address the rising cost of living here in Korea as authorities look to further raise utility bills in the near future. For more, I have Professor Song Soo-young at Chung-Ang University live on the line. Professor Song, it's been a while and it's great to speak with you again.
Yeah, good afternoon to you and thank you for inviting me.
I also have Professor Shim Myung-kyu at Yonsei University live on the line as well. Professor Shim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Professor Song, let's begin with your thoughts regarding the government's plan to delay its decision on utility bill hikes. What are your thoughts regarding this particular delay?
Yeah, I think the current delay is largely from the political reason, but however, economically, I think still it makes sense because of the shrinking economy and Korean economy is now seems to enter the recess phase. So that to that regard, it's better to bear the burden of the recess burden by the government is much reliable and for the protection of the economy.
Right. Professor Shim, regardless of this particular delay, though, the government has said a hefty hike in utility bills is inevitable going forward, given the significant losses incurred by the Korea Electric Power Corporation and the Korea Gas Corporation. What more can you tell us about their losses?
As most of us would agree, the low price in electricity and gases kept by the government for a long time seems to be the main source of the huge loss that we have seen. Then the question would be how we can resolve such an issue. I think there are two ways. First, raise the price immediately. Second, issue the government bond to fill in the loss instead of rising price right now, because it may not be a good time to raise the bill. I would say that the latter policy is just a shift of the burden from the current generation to the future generation, so it cannot resolve the fundamental issue. So while the hike in the utility bills poses another challenges on the inflation rate, I think that it is inevitable at this point because such a huge loss by KEPCO cannot be permanently allowed.
Right, I see. Professor Song, in the first quarter this year, Korea raised electricity prices by 9.5%, which was the highest hike in 40 years. Do you expect a similar surge this time around?
Yeah, when I look back at some history of the electricity price change is from the 2011 and 2012 and 2013, we have seen that 9.6%, 4.9% and 9.6% increase. And from the 2014 to the last, before the last year in the 2021, the electricity bill remains very constant over time. And last year we have witnessed, as you mentioned, a very hefty hike of the electricity bill. So this year, as I told you earlier, that government decision to stay where it is now is I think it's better, but the problem is I look into details of the coal gas and the KEPCO, why they have had such a large level of debt, and but on the other hand, still their interest rate imposed on the bond issued by the KEPCO and coal gas still maintains a relatively very cheap, low interest rate. So that is a kind of inconsistency, why that is, according to the report, is very dangerous level. However, in the corporate bond market, still regarded as the safest one next to government-issued bond. So when I look into some cash flow financial statements, of the both companies, I look some very important perspective should be which gather the attention.
Right. Hopefully that will be looked into as well then. Professor Shim, against that backdrop, what do you suppose would be the broader implications of a higher surge in electricity as well as gas prices in the future?
Given that the weights on items such as electricity and gas prices when measuring the CPI is not negligible, surge in such items would pose another challenge, as I said, to lower the inflation rate. For instance, the inflation rate of electricity and the related items was already 12% in the last year, which is much higher than the overall inflation rate of 5%. So allowing higher utility bills would have much larger impacts on the inflation rate this year without any ambiguity. So it will be inevitable to avoid the additional shock that would raise the inflation rate this year.
Right, I see. Professor Song, findings for February show that industrial output, retail sales and facility investment all rose while chip production itself plunged. What are your prospects on Korea's economic health in the near future?
In the near future, I have a very pessimistic, non-promising at all. But the main reason is because of the confrontation between U.S. and China is increased, and also then the current government of South Korea has emphasized some security issues over the economic issues. So economic issues are addressed under the guise of the national security. And as long as our government emphasized some kind of the alliance with our the U.S. and other Japan, then it could be exacerbated. Particularly, Professor Shim has mentioned the impact on the CPI. When I look back in 2014 and 2019, KDI and the KIEP, they have announced the electricity bill increase impact relatively weaker from the 0.032 percentage point and just 0.15 for percentage point. But recently I have seen some report in last year in the 2022, December, I have seen that the impact would be much larger, which is 0.32%, which is just 10 times bigger than the previous measure, the impact on the CPI. So as long as the government would like to maintain the policy against pressuring, lowering the CPI for the time being, I think the better way to keep the inflation, to keep the electricity bill as it used to be. But however, as I mentioned earlier, the interest rate borne by the KOGAS and the KEPCO is much lower. And another aspect is from the operation, when I look into the cash flow statement, which was announced by KOGAS and KEPCO, both they have positive cash flow and relatively stable and non-negative cash flow from the operation, which means when they sell the electricity and they're from the main operation, the cash flow is not as bad as anticipated. However, the negative and the increasing debt level is caused by some cash flow, the investment activities. So what kind of investment activities have been conducted during the past several years? I do not look into details, but I quite wonder and I'm concerned about this could be related with the issues of the transformation of the electricity industries, the way how they produce and generate electricity power. So it is up to recently we have seen that the natural gas has transformed and it has been greatly increased because of the weather and the climate crisis around the world. And that is maybe the equipments and the machines and some kind of new factories has been established under the for example, capital expenditure has been maybe dramatically increased for both of the firms, KOGAS and KEPCO. If that would be the case, the focus should lie on not on the electricity bill, but on the what kind of investment activities are involved. As long as investment activities are related with some long-term issues, such as long-term operation, then it's better for those both firms rely more on the financing from the through the issuance of the bonds. To that regard, in the last year, December 2020, the National Assembly has approved the increment of the bond issuance against equity value and their own cash accumulated balance. So I think we think we need to wait and see whether how those increased limit of the bond issuance played out on the upcoming years. As long as we are in the phase of on the verge of the recess, I think that would be the much better way to avoid that.
Right, I see. And moving forward then, Professor Shim, Korea's exports themselves, they've been losing significant ground in recent months. And that being said, what do you suggest to address this particular challenge on the export front?
So while the topic is different, I'm in line with Professor Song's view that I'm rather pessimistic about the current situation surrounding Korea. I'm not sure if there are that many good policies that the government can impose to resolve the issue, because the trade deficit seems to be mainly driven by factors that are beyond the control of Korean firms and the government. First, the tightened monetary policy in the U.S. and other advanced economies made it difficult to export due to low demand overall. And also, this trend seems to continue this year again because the war, the Russia-Ukraine war, seems to be has the persistent effect on the global economy. And the global economy is expected to decline due to the lagged effect of the tightened monetary policy in the last year, and also barriers to export increase, such as the IRA Act. Maybe the usual and classical suggestion would apply. The firm needs to put more efforts to advance technologies to compete with the foreign companies, and the government should aid the firms that try to advance themselves.
Right, and adding on to what Professor Shim has just said, Professor Song, the government here is also seeking to ease the fallout from the failing exports by providing members of the public with discount coupons and tax incentives to boost domestic consumption, that is. How do these measures, Professor Song, look to affect the country's current inflation?
Yeah, actually, these tax subsidy or other help from the government would be to revive the domestic economies, the domestic part. Particularly in the last year, we have this year January, we have witnessed that for the first time the balance of payment has fallen into a negative range. So because of the negative net exports, so that is really serious effect on the current account of the Korean economy. So as long as our dependence on the trade against the GDP level is huge and almost 80%, 90%, that is shrinking because of the decreased export and decreased import, which implies that our Korean economy's product is shrinking actually. So to that regard, what I'm most concerned about is we rely too much on some kind of some chip producers such as Samsung and SK, and in the battery field, we have three major LG Energy Solution and some SK On, and those companies they suffer. Particularly they are subject to the ILA effect. there is a very negative effect on the ILA because the ILA just 3 days ago, the details of the ILA implementation is introduced. Currently, the direct impose of the subsidy of the $7,500 that has been given out to the Korean companies until to 2025. The problem is, as long as the Korean manufacturers in the U.S. and in Korea, as long as they accept the government subsidy from U.S. government, they have disclosed every information about the technology, and as long as they have earned too much, that they have reported pay back some additional amount of profit to the U.S. government. So this is a kind of a nationalized. Some people say that this is actually nationalized Korean company in the U.S. So in order to overcome and minimize the negative effect of this one, we have to board on some recovery of the economic growth in China. To that regard, I strongly urge the current government should pose to remain some balanced diplomacy, and so that is for the purpose of economic improvement and also for the purpose of security, national security. That could be much better preserved under the balanced position.
Right, and to place priority perhaps on Korean companies then. Professor Shim, the Bank of Korea is poised to share the fate of its benchmark interest rate this month. What is your outlook?
My expectation on the interest rate would be somewhat not that different from other forecasters or economists because of the risk in the banking sector in the US and possibly in Korea due to the spillover effect. It will not be that easy to raise the interest rate at this point. In addition, while the interest rate is still, inflation rate is still high, it has become 4.8% in February, which is 1.5% lower than percentage point lower than the peak in last July. Given that the Fed had raised the rate only by 0.25% last month, I guess there is a room for the BOK not to raise the interest rate this month. However, this does not imply that the interest rate interest rate hike should be stopped. Inflation rate is still high, much higher than the target rate of 2% set by the BOK. So if the turbulence in the financial market becomes tranquil, I believe that the BOK would raise the interest rate again.
Right, and that being said then, Professor Song, how would another hike by the BOK look to affect Korea's housing market?
If you ask my personal opinion, then I definitely object to the hike of interest rate because the decoupling between the Korea and the U.S. has been already very sustained quite a meaningful period, and also the economic situation is quite different between U.S. and Korea because U.S. has established some kind of fence and protect their economy and coerce and force the allied countries to send their companies and build manufacturing companies in the U.S. But however, and in return, they provide some security protection. That's because they dare to demand and request some payment for themselves. So to that regard, the U.S. economy is they could concentrate on some inflation issue as long as that implies that the U.S. economy recovery is relatively very robust and the job market is good. But however, in Korea is thoroughly different. We are already in the almost a phase in the recess, and the divergence between some top level wealthy people and the lower people and the middle people. Actually, I think the Korean middle income family is almost wiped out currently because of the hiked interest rate and also it's very difficult. They lose jobs opportunities. So that is my main concern lies in that the next BOK open market committee, they should just retain what the current interest right now, or preferred lower interest rate preferred, definitely.
Right, I'm sure many would agree with you right there. Professor Shim, this next topic was something that both you and Professor Song mentioned earlier, but what's the latest regarding the Biden administration's guidelines on EV tax credits under its Inflation Reduction Act?
First of all, it seems that the guidelines on EV tax credit that was provided last week have reflected the stance of Korea and less partially. In particular, EV should satisfy the following 3 criteria to receive subsidy. First, it should be produced in the US. Second, more than 50% of the components of battery should be produced or assembled in the US. Third, more than 30% of an applicable critical mineral should be extracted or processed in the US or in the countries in which the US has an FTA. So auto and battery industries in Korea do not need to change the process right now, which relieves the initial concerns that the IRA Act would have significant negative effects on South Korea. However, critical minerals should not be procured from foreign entity of concerns to receive the subsidy from 2025. So the immediate task for the battery industry would be to diversify the portfolio other than China, which would be classified as the foreign entity of concerns with very high likelihood.
Right, foreign countries of concern as dictated by, of course, the US. Meanwhile, back on the cost of living, Professor Song, here in Korea, how should members of the public perhaps seek to better weather the hikes or the potential hikes in overall prices?
Yeah, it's like some jumping around these several issues. As Professor Shim mentioned, some ILA problem, I agree with his opinion, but it could have a negative impact on the Korean companies. In addition to that, I have mentioned that some critical issues are hidden by some implementation of this ILA is really the companies are more subject to the U.S. government national policy, and also security issues are always totally determined by the ad hoc approach, by attitude of the U.S. Government. Whether they determine this is related with the security issue, they can impose whatever they want. So that is a really vulnerable situation for the companies. So as Professor Shim mentioned, the portfolio are diversified exporting. So it is very good, and I truly agree with that. But in order to achieve that, what we are required and needed is we must maintain some balanced position in the international diplomatic order. Otherwise, it's just a vacant voice. So. And also about the CPI case, I think as long as we are in the recess, the CPI should not be our main concern, right. Even though still it is important, maybe. But however, I would rather suggest the Korean government to control the price gouging, particularly.
Right, I see.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Right, hopefully they are listening to you then, Professor Song. As always, thank you so much, Professor, for your insights. And Professor Shim, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Right, well, that ends Monday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. Do join us again same time tomorrow. That would be Tuesday.